Thank you for doing this. This is your first time to come and be interviewed for the legal profession class, but as I told you, what we're going to do is we're just going to have a conversation until about 9:15 or so, and then we're going to open it up to the students to ask you questions about what it's like to be a big firm lawyer and anything else they want to ask about. Probably the best thing to do would be just certainly just introduce yourself to the students about why you decided to become a lawyer, the kinds of things that you did in practice, so that they have a feel and context for where your comments will be coming from.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be out on this fine morning with you here. Thanks everybody for wading in or swimming in. Well, a little bit about my background. I was an Army brat. My dad was a career soldier. I grew up all over the world, really, but primarily, as most military families will tell you, we were in and out of the South more than anybody else. My family was originally from East Tennessee, but both my mom and dad, but traveled all around. And then I also went into the military. I went to the Citadel in Charleston. I went there on an Army scholarship. As a result of that, I owed the Army 4 years of active duty and 2 years of reserve duty. That's the way you would pay back an Army scholarship. And I was kind of suited for military life, both by maybe genetics and training, and liked it a lot. Had every intention of making a career out of the Army. And then I kind of ran into peacetime Army. This was back during the Carter administration, those days, and I don't know, I just began to gnaw at me that maybe that was not the place for an ambitious young person to be. I mean, nobody knew what they were going to do with the Army, and it was downsizing after Vietnam and other things. And I had always, obviously I had always loved a good fight. I had wrestled in high school and college. I fought taekwondo when I was young. So I started thinking, being a lawyer might not be a bad way to, best use my limited skill set. That or a security guard, I guess I could have looked at. So I started looking around for law schools. And then of course, serendipity always plays so much a part in your life. I had worked on a road crew in high school in Columbus, Georgia one time with a fellow that went to Mercer. And he was always telling me about what a great place it was and how he had planned to go to law school. The sad fact is I don't know whether he did or not. I don't know whether he ever went to law school or not. But when I started looking around at law schools, my last duty assignment was down at Fort Stewart, Georgia. And I knew that I probably wanted to stay in the Southeast. I knew that a legal profession, in addition to doing what I thought that I would be well suited for, would also allow me to get active in politics, which is something that's always fascinated me. And so for that reason, I looked primarily at Southeastern law schools. And then I got accepted at Mercer, and they offered me a full scholarship. And so I thought that made it kind of a no-brainer to do, and came and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Okay. Well, you graduated in 1982, as I said, and you've now, at a relatively young age, retired. What'd you do in between?
What have I been up to? I have been a litigator. I have defended, for the most part, I have defended corporations in complicated business disputes. I tried to stay as broad gauge as I could and apply the skill set that I had to as many industries, different types of claims as I could, just so that it would keep you fresh and you wouldn't be narrowly put into a narrow ditch, I guess, of work that you were doing. I began to the extent that there's ever any plan in the development of your career, I started looking around in the late 80s and early 90s, and it occurred to me that the plaintiff's bar in commercial disputes had come to realize, quite correctly, that you could get such a multiplier effect on your work if you were in a mass claim. I mean, the more plaintiffs you had in a claim, the more money that they could make. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's economics. And then I thought, okay, I'm in a large law firm that prides itself in doing premium work at premium rates. Isn't it more likely that if you specialized in that work, there's going to be more of that kind of work? I remember I was in Leadership, Georgia with Dick Creswell, professor here in 1996, and I was telling him that's how I was going to start specializing in class actions and I had already by that time started specializing in class actions, multi-jurisdictional litigation. And basically, that is what led my career the rest of the time. I specialized in that. I became noted for it twice. The class action practice that I helped develop at King & Spalding has been noted as one of the top 5 class action practices in the United States. And that's kind of the direction that I got off on.
When you were sitting in this room as a student, did you have any idea what you were going to do?
I knew that I was going to be a litigator. I don't think that there was ever any doubt in my mind about that, by temperament and hopefully training and skill set.
That's always the first big decision.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Are you going to go into transaction work, or are you going to go into litigation? And the advice that I've given young people over time, if they came into our summer program and they were trying to decide what they want to do, I would say, do you really enjoy a good fight, a good argument with somebody? I mean, and I love to argue with my friends, and I'm sure you do too. I mean, if you like to do that, then maybe you ought to be a litigator. On the other hand, if it just really turns your stomach, you just can't stand confrontation. You're much more of a mediator, and you want to get people together to get the right solution, then go become a transaction lawyer. That's what those guys do, and they get a great deal of satisfaction out of it. Now, did I know that I was going to be a big firm corporate litigator? Absolutely not. I had never been in a law firm before I went for my first interview for a job. So I had never been in a law firm. So I had no idea the difference between King & Spalding and a solo practitioner, that did criminal defense work. I knew nothing about that.
Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, that this week we are talking about large law firms and special issues that may arise in that context. And if they've done their assigned work, they've listened to an online lecture from me to talk about some of the pressures on lawyers in big law firms in terms of the economics and so on. And some people hear that lecture and they take it as a negative. It's not intended to be. I mean, I was in a big firm like King & Spalding and loved every minute of it. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about life in a big firm and what about it was really positive. What is it that you enjoyed? I mean, if there are negatives, feel free to do that. Camera's on you, though. I'm warning you here. But given that they've heard some negatives, I want them to hear from somebody that's lived this for 30 years.
Sure.
What was good about it?
Okay. Well, first, normally I give this, I've given this comment to people, take anything that I say about the practice of law with a grain of salt, because this is the only thing I've ever done. There may be other terrific ways to make a living doing this. It's just I've never seen it, and I was never really tempted to go somewhere else, because since I did like what I was doing, I honestly didn't think that there was a better place for me than where I was. I practiced at one firm for 30 years. I believe, I was about to say I'm the only person in my law school class that is still with the same firm that he or she started with 30 years ago. But I think there's a guy named Alan Heeb in Jacksonville may also still be with the same firm that he went with. I will just tell you that in your experience, chances are you're going to change firms or the type of practice you will have several times. That seems to be the trend. But as I said, I've had, if not unique, but unusual in staying at the same place. What did I like so much about that? First off, and most always importantly, I liked the people. I got along very well with the people, and through a self-selection process, we were attracting other people that really liked to practice law at a very high level. With extremely rare exceptions, I never had to worry about my partners not being as ambitious or hardworking as I was and as I wanted to be. And that, a lot of people I know that have had unhappiness in their practice is a result of that dislocation, whatever your personality is. If you are a person that really, kind of wants to play at practicing law, but you also want to be a jazz musician, you're going to be unhappy if you're in a place where everybody is driven to and just practices law. On the other hand, if you are a driven person and you end up at a law firm where, they want to take Wednesday afternoons off and playing golf on Friday is accepted by partners or something, then you're not going to be happy with that either. So in that regard, I was very happy in that I ended up with a group of like-minded people. And then within my own practice, I will always say the thing that I liked the most about it was the way that I would get thrown into new industries. I was really to the very end of my practice, some of the most enjoyable time that I had when I would get hired by a new client, I would be put into a business that I had never heard of before and figure out, darn, there are so many ways you can make money in this world, isn't it strange? And then there's so many ways that you can screw that up, and so that's what I was always brought in to handle was, human nature being what it is. I don't think that there will ever be any shortage of disputes for people to resolve, but I certainly did enjoy, over the years, everything from the milk industry, things that you would just think, God, that is so mundane, it can't possibly be interesting, but the milk industry, automobile distribution, the manufacture and sale of Coca-Cola is a fascinating business and how they've done it. And as a lawyer, you not only are kind of required to get in there and do it, you're required to do it quickly. I remember one of my favorite compliments was I had gotten thrown in this automobile distribution matter on a TRO, temporary restraining order basis. So we had these guys, our opponents were trying to stop this company from shutting down this business. So the regional manager came down with me. We met, for 2 hours. We went over to court at 3 o'clock, and I stood up and argued, my little heart out and everything, and they denied the TRO. And so we're walking back to the office, and the regional manager said, "I got to hand it to you. I walked into your office, and the questions you were asking me, it was clear you knew nothing about our business, and yet 2 hours later you were standing up there in court acting like you knew everything about our business." And so I said, "Yeah, that's kind of one of my shticks. You've got to learn to be able to do that." So those are the things that I really enjoy about the practice of law.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because I had exactly the same reaction. The first case I ever had involved steel-toed safety boots. My last case involved cows. Of course, I was in Texas.
Yeah.
Everybody had to have a cow case. So yeah. One phrase you use, I want you to see if you want to elaborate on just a little bit. You said one of the things that gave you joy about this was practicing at a very high level. Could you explain to the students what you mean when you talk about practicing at a high level?
Well, King & Spalding kind of prides itself, it represents, I think, over half of the Fortune 500 companies. They are, the good news, bad news is those companies are willing to pay for really good representation. They are demanding, however, that they see a lot of different law firms and they know what value is and what so they can be nitpicky about bills and things like this. And they're very discerning in that if a law firm is not delivering value to them, they'll go somewhere else fairly quickly. But it was extremely rare in my practice, if ever, really, where I felt that the cost constraints on doing the best job that I could do interfered with me doing the best job that I could do. I had a friend that started out at a large firm in Atlanta, and after a couple of years he went back because his wife wanted to live in a small town, and he became extremely frustrated because he said the people just can't pay you to do this right. He had gotten trained to do things in one way, and then he had to go back down there where he says, the local farmer or the businessman, if they've got a dispute, they just can't pay to do that. And so I felt that the way that I was practicing, the only excuse for not delivering a good product was my lack of effort. And so that's what I mean by at a high level.
Well, one of the things I want to talk about, this is, it's not an easy thing to talk about, and sometimes not a pleasant thing to talk about, but let me introduce it this way. I have a brother who's a pastor. Right? He and I are very different, but one thing he once said to me, he says, you know, Pat, the only thing you and I have in common is that we make our living off of other people's problems. Right? Which is an interesting way of looking at the pastor. But as a lawyer, you're paid to take on other people's problems. You're paid to take them on your shoulders, just like I was. That's a lot of pressure. Practicing at a high level, as you're talking about, is a lot of pressure. Could you talk a little bit about how you handle that kind of pressure for 30 years and things that you've seen that help and don't help in that regard?
Right. I call this kind of the lawyer's dilemma. I do believe that the best lawyers take their clients' problems to be their own. Again, going back to our client base, the general counsel of the Coca-Cola company once told a group of us, said, I pay outside counsel to have the pain to take the pain in my stomach and put it in their stomach, so that I can sleep at night and they're the ones that are awake. And the dilemma I say about that is, it really is the good lawyers do take that on. But if you really take it on, then you are constantly in trouble. I mean, you think about this. I mean, for at least 25 years, I really haven't had any financial problems. I haven't had any some health problems, but nothing to significance. My kids are great, and yet every morning I would wake up with this knot in my stomach about, what about this problem? What about that problem? And it's always, your client's problems, and you anguishing over them and working on them is what will make you a good lawyer. But you've got to step back from that. There's got to be a way to remove yourself from that. And you complicate that situation with kind of now it's becoming a slightly better known secret, but the legal profession has an epidemic of depression and mental problems with lawyers. And I'm convinced that part of it, and I know it's not all of it, part of it is the fact that you internalize the problems of your clients all the time. I can only imagine. I never had to stand in court and know that if I didn't do a good job, somebody was going to go to jail or somebody was going to face the death penalty. Some of you will face that. If you're going to be a prosecutor or a defense lawyer, I can only imagine how that must grind at you. You then couple that with the fact that people with outgoing personalities are attracted to the law and in fact succeed in it. It's a problem, and so I appreciate you bringing up this subject. This is a little heavy, and I apologize for bringing something up like this morning, but it's something that's on my mind. In the last 3 years, I've had 2 close friends commit suicide. Both were lawyers. Both were very successful lawyers, but one in particular, I felt a great personal failing because I didn't perceive his problem. I didn't know that he was having. The other person was separated by distance, but this one person I worked with carefully. And then it turned out that he had suffered from bipolar disease. His wife had helped him conceal this. He didn't want anybody at the firm to know about it or to help him. It's something I think as a profession we need to talk more about. And so to you, again, it's a tough subject for this early in the morning and young people at this beginning of your career. But I would say to you, if at any point in your career you begin to feel that pressure, please seek help. There's plenty of medicines now. This one fellow had been well treated and then had voluntarily gone off of his medicines, and it became, it's nearly a death sentence if that's the case. I've since learned. And the other thing is, I would say, look out for your neighbors, look out for your friends. I was able to spot two two people that, when I was in charge of a litigation team, that clearly were beginning to have episodes of depression. You know, you can begin to notice things like they don't ever get a timesheet in. They've got this problem, the delay on procrastinating on getting things. So I confronted them with it, got them treatment, and I think it helped both of them. One is a very successful prosecutor now. So again, a tough topic, but I hope you will. I hope the profession starts talking more openly about it.
Well, one of the things that we know is that something that's very strongly associated with depression, nobody knows what causes it, but associated with it is chronic stress. Mm-hmm. And if there's not any profession that has chronic stress, it's ours.
Absolutely. And combine that, again, going back to getting into too many anecdotes here, but fatigue. I know my friend had just come out of a 7-week-long trial, and the stress of that, and then just you've got to, if you're one of these people that need 14 hours of sleep, you may not be in the right profession. I mean, there's going to be times where you've just got to hammer at it hard for extended periods of time, either on the transaction side or on the litigation side, and I do think that can lead to very dangerous conditions.
Let's turn to a happier topic.
Yes.
One of the things that I hope the students over the course of the semester begin to appreciate, and we really haven't talked much about it yet, is the importance of finding mentors early in their career to help guide them through those difficult early years. I had a great mentor, practiced law with him every day that I practiced law. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about yours and about the importance of having a good mentor, how you find one, and then maybe a little bit about you in turn mentoring other young lawyers.
Well, our profession still probably should have a formal apprenticeship program. It doesn't, but we do have an informal apprenticeship program, and every successful lawyer that I know will always go back and say, look, I am what I am because of the great training and help that I got from mentors when I was not only younger. I'll tell you, one gentleman that I will mention with reverent terms is Frank Jones, and I know you know Frank. Frank was a graduate of this law school, a past president of the American College of Trial Lawyers. He was the senior most trial lawyer at King and Spalding.
Let me interject for just a second to tell the students. I sat down with Mr. Jones a few years ago in this format for several hours and recorded an oral history. Wonderful. They're going to be assigned later in the semester to watch it. So they're going to.
Here's my way of background. Just a giant of this profession, and that was a great thing that you did to record his thoughts on so many topics. But Frank was one of my mentors and guides, and I called him in my tribute to him, and he just recently passed away last year. I said, I did not make a major decision in my life in the last 20 years that I didn't call Frank Jones and ask him about it, and so it's a great relationship to have, obviously, and make that bond and keep a relationship with a mentor. Now, I'll transition into my role as a mentor in a second, but I will cast one little bit of warning that you've got to be careful about in a mentor-mentee relationship. At least I was always a little bit wary of becoming known too much as just a bag carrier for that person. I wanted to learn from them, but I wanted to learn from as many people as I could. And I tried cases with Frank Jones. I worked on matters with Griffin Bell. I would go, because everybody you learn. My dad gave me a great line years ago. It says, everybody can be an example, even if it's a bad example. So even if you work with somebody that was not particularly good, if you're learning from them. So I don't want to say that I ever kind of stiff-armed anybody, but I did not want to. Early on, I worked very, very closely with Griffin Bell, and it was such an honor. Griffin Bell was a former Attorney General of the United States, former Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals judge, and the big dog at King and Spalding when I started. And so I fell in with him relatively early. Again, I'll tell anecdote that may or may not be relevant, but worth remembering. Even though I was a Mercer graduate, even though he knew that, I had not really worked with him in about the first year and a half that I had been at the firm. But I had this one project that I was really grinding on, and I actually think also, talking about work-life balance, I think my little daughter had a 4-year-old soccer game or something at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. So what I had done was my old Army training, I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, go down to the office, be there at 6:30, on a Saturday morning, work, and then I would go to her soccer game. So at about 7 o'clock one Saturday morning, I was sitting at my desk, grinding away at something, and who walks by but Griffin Bell? And he probably had come to get something as he was on his way out of town or something that day. So he looked in there and said, "Davis, what are you doing in here?" So we're just catching up on some stuff. So he said, "Oh, that's good. Glad to see you in here working. It's good on a Saturday morning." Now, the very next week, he got hired by E.F. Hutton Company to do this massive investigation that you probably have remembered. Now it's become ancient history, but it was the biggest legal event of 1985, I guess is when we did that. But when he started putting his team together, he said, "Let's get that Davis kid in here on this thing." So that was the first major thing that I ever worked on. But after a couple of years with him, I realized, I need to make sure that I'm developing trial skills. And he was at the level, he really wasn't trying many cases anymore. So that's when I moved over kind of with Frank and tried the Coca-Cola cases and got into those. So, okay. Now about my mentoring, I just recently told one of my partners this. They had very nice ceremonies for me retiring from King and Spalding and the like. But the thing that meant the most to me was not clients sending in memos or sending me mementos and things like that. That was all very nice. But to have some of my junior partners, and 3 of them in particular, stood up at my retirement party and said, Dwight Davis always took the time to tell us not only what he was doing, but why he was doing it. And then he always gave us an opportunity to try us out. And so the legacy that you leave in this is a very ephemeral business. I practiced law for 30 years, and it's just barely a ripple in the great wave of the ocean of law. But a legacy that you can leave will be other lawyers that learned from you and valued the relationship that they had. So,
well, of course, that was the central question that I would have is why do it? Because, frankly, to some extent, it has eroded over the generations, but I think that the tradition is still very strong. Mm-hmm. Sure. That older lawyers give a hand up to younger lawyers. And what you're telling me is that one of the reasons you do it is just the satisfaction of doing it.
Yes.
And the students have learned about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic rewards, money, and so on, versus that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
So, that's true. Of course, this semester they're learning about, you talk about ephemeral, this concept of lawyer professionalism. Mm-hmm. Now you know that I define it, and I give them a very, a structure mm-hmm. to talk about what that means. But what I'd like for you to do, if you could, is to talk about any issue you would call issues of professionalism that you encountered in 30 years. Mm-hmm. One in particular I've got in mind, but it could be anything, mm-hmm. is incivility, mm-hmm. strategic mm-hmm. incivility, somebody deliberately being provocative.
The Rambo litigator.
Yeah, right? That's what they used to call it. Mm-hmm. And then how what you encountered, mm-hmm. what harm it did, and then how you dealt with it.
Well, yeah, that's a very good topic, and I'm be glad to talk about that, because let me start by saying first, I take my duty to vigorously advocate for my clients very seriously. I think I think that a lot of lawyers you can kind of get mired in the practice and forget that your first duty is to vigorously advocate for your client. I'm about to say defend, but you prosecute for them, defend them. You are their advocate, and our system only works if you're really doing your job well and the other person is doing their job well. Now, when I was a young lawyer, it seemed to me that it was just beginning. Maybe it was just because I was getting into it, but it was just beginning that there were these people called Rambo litigators. That they said the way that they're going to do the best for their client is just to be as obnoxious as they possibly can. They're going to make you make a mistake by just being in your face, yelling, all of that. And it was my good fortune to run into one of those people early on. And I watched him carefully because in all candor, if that was successful, then maybe that's what you should be doing. But what I learned early on was it's not successful. In the short term, maybe anecdotally you can find sometime where somebody may have won a case that they should not have, but in the near short term and certainly in the long term, it is not the best way to advocate for your clients. It makes it more expensive, more time consuming. This guy was a complete jerk, fought on everything. I'll never forget, I walked into his office and he started pointing at me saying, "Your client killed my client and you're going to pay for it." I mean, that kind of attitude. We litigated with him for about 2 years, and he got what we would have paid for the case if we'd had a mediation and settled it early on. So it began to that early experience and repeated many times showed me that what he was really trying to make up for was his lack of other skills, and you're not going to really charm in the other side into giving you a better deal because they're vigorously defending their client too. But you're not going to intimidate them either into giving you a better deal because you're just such an obnoxious jerk. You might well, if you get a reputation for trying your cases or preparing your cases efficiently, taking them to trial, not being afraid to try your case, you may well get a reputation that the other side's going to give you a better deal because they know you're a serious lawyer and you're going to take them to trial. And that's the reputation I wanted to have. I wanted the other side to look up my trial record and say, "Wow, this guy will take you to the mat," and he's been pretty darn successful at it too. That had absolutely nothing to be about being a jerk or not giving extensions if they're warranted or not playing by the rules.
Fighting over where a deposition's going to ever have that.
We would fight over everything. I mean, which side of the table we would sit at in a deposition. That's a true story.
Well, you know the story, and you know it's true that a few years ago, two lawyers couldn't agree on where the deposition would occur. Their offices happened to be in the same building. They took it to a federal judge who ordered them to play rock, paper, scissors on the steps of the federal courthouse.
Exactly.
Yeah, so.
Let's just say this business can be miserable enough. It's going to be tough. You're going to have to cancel vacations because a trial gets set. You're going to have to miss a birthday party because the deposition runs over. Don't make it any more miserable than it needs to be. If a guy called you up and says, that this hearing falls in the middle of my vacation, can we move it a week? Why in the heck not do that? I know it's serious.
I remember the first time I encountered it, and you were about the same age, and so we're the same generation, certainly. And if I were sitting in their shoes, what I would want to know is how do you deal with it in the moment? When you have somebody like that, and really next week we're going to be talking particularly about civility, but in the moment, how do you deal with that obnoxious lawyer? They've seen a tape of Joe Jamail. You know about Joe.
Absolutely.
And in the moment, how do you deal with it and keep your own sense of professionalism?
Again, I'll harken back to my youthful indiscretions. But when I was a boxer, the last thing you wanted to do was get mad, because if you got mad, you were not thinking as clearly as you should. And so, no matter if the guy had popped you in the nose and your eyes were stinging, you had to keep trying to think clearly what's going to happen, what's coming next. And that's the way I always tried to react to Joe Jamail in particular, is that he would try to get you mad so you weren't thinking clearly. And I would just try to stay as calm as I could, not overreact, and then let him know that he was also not going to bully me around. We would just say, we're going to call the judge on that. That's the last time I'm saying this. If you use language like that one more time, we're going to call the judge, and he'll supervise this deposition, or always threaten to call in a third party. Whatever. Don't have a downward progression, lowest common denominator with them. That if they pull some stunt, you're now going to pull some stunt back.
Fighting fire with fire.
Exactly. You continue to keep the first rule in mind. I've got to do what's in my client's best interest. Again, I'll harken back to one of the tributes that one of the young lawyers, or young partners now, gave to me was, we were in a mediation of all things in New York City. And one group of plaintiffs' lawyers, a big class action out of Arkansas, and this one group of plaintiffs' lawyers had showed up, and we had had some talk, give and take. This one guy's plane had gotten delayed. By the way, his private jet had gotten delayed getting into New York.
Did you hate it when that happened?
So yeah, that happens to me all the time. So he came in late, and we had been separated, and we walked back in the conference room, and he said, "Who's in charge here?" And I said, "Well, I don't know that anyone's in charge, but I'm the senior lawyer for the defendants." He then just started screaming at me, this outrageous offer, and this was complete, just horrible language and everything like that. And so I listened to it for about 2 minutes, and I said, okay, well, this is over. And so I just got my client up and left. Now, the thing that I always regretted, to this day, I still regret, is it was in my office. And I got up and left, so I should have said, you get out of my office. I'm going to get out of here. But it turns out it was, so I just take my entourage, my client and the associate and everybody else, and we go to another room. And I had to sit down and call, just breathe deeply, everything. But what I knew was my client desperately wanted to settle that case. They needed to get that case settled because of some other things that were moving, some other moving pieces. And so the mediator came up and he said, okay, we want to reconvene this later? I said, no, I think everybody ought to take an hour, calm down. My message back to them is, if there is a reasonable person left in the room, let them talk to me. But I'm not going to be talking to that guy anymore. So the plaintiffs group then got together, kind of culled him out of the herd, got another representative and started talking, and we settled it. And so the compliment that my now partner said was, he said, I was so mad, I was ready to just walk. But Dwight said, no, what's in the best interest of the client, and went back and settled. So,
and of course, that's based on experience. That's based on not being surprised, I guess, when it happened.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and by the way, we settled within the range. Again, what that jerk did nothing to him. But did he really think that I was going to put more money on the table because he was going to scream at me and curse?
I wouldn't.
I've been cursed by the best of them,
Get in line, right? I want to turn this over just a minute to the students, but you've got the entire first year class here, and if there's any bit of advice, I'm going to turn it over to you. Any advice that maybe something you wish you had known when you were a first-year law student, any words of wisdom for them? They, as I tell them every time at this point in the interview, they have to be here, so they're a captive audience. So anything anything you wish you had known when you were sitting in classroom C that you know?
Well, I hope you will all take some comfort in knowing that after 30 years, I still thoroughly enjoyed what I did. I will say that it's like I said, I also like ice cream. I just don't like it 3 meals a day, 7 days a week for 30 years. So it was time for a change, and I was going to go off and do some other things for a while. It is an honorable profession. There's an old cliche that said there's no better group of people to talk with or laugh with or argue with than lawyers, and drink with. I think they also threw in there. But I will still say to this day that sadly I find that true. I'm rather xenophobic about, I can have conversations with a lawyer on so many different levels, and I find that lawyers, for the most part, are interesting people that also read interesting books and go to see movies and find new restaurants and kind of things that is just and are interested in politics, which I am. Just more diverse and multifaceted people, and you ought to aspire to do that too. The one thing I guess that has surprised me more than anything else, the thing that I did not know when I was sitting in your place, was after all, I did not know how dynamic the practice of law was going to be. we are, after all, it's a profession that prides itself in precedent and slow change and conservative movement, gradual movement, and yet at least at a firm like King and Spalding, which again prides itself in being a premium provider of premium legal services, what is defined as premium is going to change a rotation of about every 5 years. What is one time a premium product that is novel and you can get premium rates for becomes commodity work. And if you're not looking out there to see what's the next thing I'm going to do, what can I do to deliver more value to my clients, you're going to find yourself on a gradual decline. And I don't think you want to do that. Otherwise, you're going to be in a rut of a problem.
Especially in a generation that's witnessing technological change that, like,
imagine
never seen before.
Yeah.
Well, let me turn it over to you all. What questions do you have this morning, Mr. Davis? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that you did class action litigation. We've learned that you can't just jump into it and just say, hey, I'm a class action lawyer. So how was your journey getting into that type of litigation?
Well, I had the good fortune to being thrown into one in a firm that did those cases. I also had the good fortune of getting into one where the client really wanted to slug it out. My mentor, Griffin Bell, always said, you can't be a great lawyer without great clients. And the fact is, we had a client that said, we're right, this is a part of our business restructuring, and we'll take this all the way to the mat. So relatively early in my career, I got to work on a big class action, and it went all the way to trial. Now, when that case was over, I had the unfortunate realization, I've done nothing but work on this one case for about 4 years. I've got to generate some business. I've got to come up with other work. So I stepped back and I said, well, you know, what I am now is one of the few lawyers in America who has tried a class action case. It dealt with franchising and distribution. So I started writing on franchising and distribution, and lo and behold, other clients started contacting me, and so that's the way I parlayed that into a career. Yes, sir.
You said you had a case against Joe Jermail.
Yes.
He has that famous YouTube video about the Texas deposition.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, in your situation with him, did it ever get like that bad, or did you ever go against attorneys, or where depositions just really broke down and you couldn't handle, or you couldn't continue the deposition?
Oh yeah, I have stopped depositions because of misconduct by the lawyers. Because I think at that point you've got the high ground. Because if they're going to go back and reconvene it, they're going to have to go to the judge, and I'm going to explain to them why this person was being such a jerk. When we actually got through the Jermail deposition, but at one point he said, what was it like? How can you ask a question like that? Where did you go to law school? Did you ever take evidence? He said that. He said that on the record. He said, let's ignore. Please, let's go ahead and answer the question. You know, just ignore him and go right along. You know, with the thing. Now, the thing that's maybe even doubly annoying about Jermail, it was not, by the way, about that first Rambo litigator I was going to tell you about. I would never have said 2 pleasant words to that other guy. But Jermail, as soon as the deposition's over, he's saying, "Hey, let's go get a drink. What do you say?" And he said, "Well, first let me show you something." So he took us back into his war room, and he had all these trophies. And as soon as the light went off, he was as pleasant an old guy as you'd ever want to say. I mean,
Which tells you it was all strategic.
Exactly. He was trying to rattle you. The same. Jerry Beasley over in Alabama is exactly the same. He's the Joe Jermail type in that he will. It's all strategic. He's going to try to wear you out, but then is a pleasant person. What I know of whatever.
Interesting.
Back in the day.
Other questions?
You spoke a lot about being a partner at King and Spalding. Can you talk about how it was when you first started, and was it very competitive, and how did you deal with that?
Can the microphone pick that up? Should
Yeah,
we please repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, could you talk about being a young lawyer at King and Spalding before you became a partner, and in particular, was the atmosphere, I assume you mean among the associates, competitive, knowing that not all of them would become partners?
Mm-hmm. Well, It was, to this day, my best friends are the young lawyers that I started out with, and we were fortunate that a lot of us stayed. Some didn't. One's a federal judge now in Atlanta, and otherwise. So, at least at King and Spalding, if you were perceived as having sharp elbows or being too much of a gunner, the partners, I think, realized they didn't want to have to deal with that person either for the rest of their lives. So there was one corporate lawyer in particular that ended up washing out because it was just too obvious that he was just too ambitious, or he at least he wasn't hiding his ambition well enough, masquerading at it. I thought that the lawyers that I practiced with when I was a young lawyer they were very collegial. We all got along. We all recognized in the back of our mind, they're not going to make 8 of us partners in litigation. Somebody's going to make it, somebody's not. But with a group that's that gifted and talented, they're going to find other opportunities if they want to. And in the end, most people end up kind of where they should be. I was very, very comfortable in the environment of King and Spalding, and some of the other people were not, and were much happier practicing at other places or in public service.
Let's go way in the back.
You didn't talk too much about your hours at work, and how did you balance the pressures of a large firm with family life?
Right. Question has to do with hours. Part of the online lecture they listened to dealt with what your life really looks like if you're building 2,200 hours a year. And so if you could talk about that and how you found balance with your family life, that would be very helpful.
Well, that's a great question, and that's a great concern, I think. I tried kind of compartmentalizing it. Maybe I was rationalizing this to myself, I don't know. But I said to myself, and I said to my wife, look, I want to be a success in the practice of law. I've got a good legal education. Obviously I can learn things that I need to do in this way, but I need an intensive period of really learning how to be a good lawyer. So this, in the short term, it's going to be a lot of hours, but I'm learning my skills. Now, at the time, I had not read it, not heard of it, and never, as far as I know, it wasn't even on the drawing board. There's a book, though, that's been written called Outliers. Have you heard of this, or really? I recommend it to you. At first, I didn't think I was going to like it, but basically, what the guy's premise is almost everybody that is successful in whatever, anything from music all the way to computer science, has an intensive period where they're really learning their skills, and that's the way I looked at when I was a junior lawyer, and I was. Back in the day, you would have been an apprentice and you were an intern, you would have been getting paid nothing on it. I was making a pretty good salary, so it didn't bother me that I was having to put in a fair number of hours to do that, and I would just tell myself it was going to be that block of period. And I would suggest the same thing to you. You ought to think about how can I get the most experience that I can as early as I can in my career, because it's going to help you build your foundation. Now, let me say that the rest of the legal industry has been fairly good at using big law firms as a bad example of, you don't want to go with those big law firms. They work hard all the time, Honestly, I think that it's just a degree or two. Now, again, take the grain of salt. This is the only place I've ever practiced. Somebody may have figured out a great way to learn your skills, make extremely good money, and not work very hard. Now, if I could have figured that out, I would have done it, but I don't know that it's out there. My friends that went to small firms worked, within spitting distance of what I was doing. Granted, I was making more money, so maybe I was working a little bit harder than they were. Now, even with whatever the standard is you're going to take on, if you are in a relationship, you really need that. It's going to be the most important thing in your life at the end of your life, and so don't let the practice of law or anything else for that matter so dominate your life that you don't have a balanced life. Now, I alluded to this a second ago. Sometimes the way that I would balance would be that I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning on Saturday so that I could make the soccer game at 11. But that was a balance. I would have to do that. Sometimes I would just say, you know, one time I came in on a flight on Friday, got home at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and said, "What the heck? I'm just going to go home." I went home. My son, at that time was about 3 years old, came running up to me and said, "Did you lose your job?" So that's a problem. So the balance means, you know, you balance. You know, you've got to try to do some of it. And the only people that I know that or kind of miserable failures in life overall are the people that just give up on trying to balance. They don't ever try to, you know, make investments in their banking relationship with their family, you know, that they don't, you know, take a weekend off and go to the beach or do anything like that, and just stay driven at it. I don't think that's necessary to be a success in law, and if it is, I would suggest to you, don't be a success in law, then be a success overall in your life.
It takes effort.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
Other questions? We've got time for probably about one more. Yeah, I saw some other hands, so. Other questions? So now
She's thinking about something, I can tell you. Or no, you're looking.
We'll sit here for a minute unless somebody, there we go.
There.
I just threatened them.
Yeah. We're not leaving until someone asks.
We've been doing a lot of reading about basically ethical dilemmas that lawyers face. And can you tell us about an ethical dilemma that you faced throughout your career and how you resolved it?
Kind of give me a heads up that you may ask a question like that. And I did think of something. I've got to change the name slightly to protect the guilty. But now, go back to when I said I take my duty to vigorously advocate for my client very seriously. That's my first role, right? I was involved in a very contentious matter, and as you can gather as the story goes on, my opponent was not a very nice person, and I was trying to think exactly how I got this contact. Well, let me cut to the chase. One of his former employees gave me a disc that had all of the email correspondence, witness interview notes, drafts of pleadings, and just handed it to me, gave it to me, and said, "This guy's a jerk. What he's doing is criminal, and your client is being defrauded, and I don't think it's right. And here this is." Now, do you look at that CD? Do you look through those documents? It's a tough, I mean, go back, you've got an obligation to vigorously represent your client. This material's now been given to you. But I knew good and well that I was never intended to see that. And our system depends upon people fighting fairly. And so I made the decision not to look at it. I never gave it, I didn't give it back. I just never let him know one way or the other. But I consciously decided not to look at it. I don't know if I made the right decision or not, but.
Well, of course, very likely there's privileged material.
Absolutely. No, I know good and well it was privileged.
And of course, the students would frame that as you had a duty of fidelity to the law.
Yeah.
Right? And it was, to some extent, you felt a conflict with your duty of fidelity to the client and your duty to be a vigorous advocate. And that's the decision you made.
That's the decision.
By the way, it was the right decision.
Good.
Right?
Let me say,
like you need me to tell you that. This happened
during a trial, and I got this material at a hotel room out of town. I called the managing partner of my firm. I called Frank Jones at home, and I wanted them to tell me that I was doing the right thing. I wanted some reinforcement for that, because if I made the wrong decision and it ever came out, if a client found out about that, could I be sued for malpractice if I didn't do it? Maybe, but I mean, again, at the end of the day, Frank basically said what you're saying. Are you serious? You can't do that. I mean, you can't look at it. It's privileged material.
Well, Dwight, thank you very much for taking the time.